Welcome back. We are into part 2 of reviewing this RFP. It is 18 pages long, which, to be honest, in the grand scheme of state and federal level applications, is actually pretty small. And you'll notice that a lot of the stuff can be like legal jargon and through some of the appendices, stuff like that. Anyways, getting back, we're looking at the section 3 right now, eligible and ineligible applicants. This obviously would be the first thing that I would look at when determining whether or not a grant application is something I'm going to pursue. Because if this is gone, descarto, right? Like, I'm getting rid of it. It's not something that I'm going to consider as an option. Because political divisions are eligible, that worked for us. Because through a partnership that we have, like our advisory team members within the Food Council, Clay County is one of those. For applicants which are political subdivisions as defined above, the geographic area is defined by the boundary of that political subdivision. We covered this last time, right? We looked up 65,000 as population. So automatically we cannot apply for that option where it says you can have a 5% match as opposed to a 50% match. So we'll get into talking a little bit about how are we going to find the funds and how are the funds already there that can support this application. Ineligible applicants, things that aren't listed above, entities that are currently suspended or debarred from the state of Minnesota, etc. Eligible projects are those that develop or implement plans of action that enable local jurisdictions to adapt to extreme weather events and a changing climate. Okay? And or reduce the local jurisdiction's contributions to the causes of climate change. Okay. Then they give you some examples. I went ahead and just struck out this particular option, develop or update plans of action, because we've already got that process within our region. So we're just moving on. We're going to skip to this section where it talks about implementing plans of action. Political subdivisions implements one or more priority action for, and then it gives us some options. And then it also says see Exhibit B for examples of actions often included in plans. This one says climate adaptation and resilience identified in an existing plan that involved stakeholders with collaborative community engagement and the consideration of future climate data applicable to the local jurisdiction. Okay, this makes sense. It's basically saying, did we have something that was identified in a plan that already, and it's saying it wants to ensure that the process of making the plan involved a bunch of people from the community, that it wasn't just these people that were like, oh, we're going to write up this plan, and it has no feedback from people that actually live there, right? That kind of goes against everything that I was taught in my planning degree. It's like you need to have these documents reflecting the needs and desires of the community. Then the second bullet point, reduction of local contributions to the causes of climate change, aka mitigation, as defined in an existing plan that involves stakeholders with collaborative community engagement and the consideration of future climate data and greenhouse gas emissions data specific to local jurisdiction. Yes, we have this through our climate action plan. Let's see, and then it says a political divisions implements a gold leaf action. This is the climate mitigation, climate adaptation, or community connectedness category that involves grant eligible costs. For example, projects for significant public energy efficiency, community renewable energy, urban heat relief, flood mitigation, clean backup energy system, and build. I actually love these ideas, and I'm really thinking about how do we marry some of those ideas with some of what we've got going on in the food space. Up to this point, we haven't focused a ton on energy efficiency, although we have talked about that in some of the other work that I've done with regards to like grocery stores, for example, and the closing of small grocery stores across the state of Minnesota. University of Minnesota has done a lot of work on that, and you'll find that one of the biggest things that you can do to make a small grocery store more financially viable in the long term is to reduce their operating costs, aka energy, because they've found that there is a 1-to-1 ratio between the energy cost and the profit of a grocery store. It's pretty cool, it's crazy, and it's also that much more of a reason to be retrofitting our small scale grocery stores because we need them, right? That's a very important food access point. And one of the biggest challenges that they also face is in their quantity, like the ordering capabilities that they have from some of these big distributors. They're also looking at their cost of transportation and their ability to bring product out to these small towns. A lot of times it doesn't make financial sense because the small stores can't order a huge pallet, right? They don't have the same kind of storage space that some of these bigger places do. So if you're looking for a business idea, becoming a small-scale regional food distributor is very much needed in Minnesota. Come out here. We would love to have you. Okay, the next ones are specific to the other types of eligible applicants. That's how they've organized this section. And as I started reading through it, I understood that. So, for example, you'll see the same format. It says political subdivisions, then it goes into this one, including tribal governments, gold leaf thing. Then it talks about community-based organizations, educational institutions, right? So they're organizing it based on category of applicant. Ours falls within this one, so that's why I highlighted it in green. And I'm skipping past the rest because it's not the same. Ineligible projects, things that don't develop or implement plans of action. We've gotten to that point. Okay, eligible and ineligible costs. Any cost that is directly related to the work plan tasks of an eligible project and not deemed ineligible below or by MPCA staff. The list of ineligible costs below was updated to reflect a change in MPCA guidelines for the use of incentives in MPCA grants. Reasonable costs of food and or refreshments, non-alcoholic, for public meetings are now considered eligible costs. Okay, so things that you could not spend your money on. Any expenses incurred before the contract is fully executed, so that's basically saying money that you spent before you started the project. Okay, that makes sense. Bad debts, late payment fees, finance charges, or contingency funds, interest and investment management fees. Got it. Attorney fees, employee worksite parking, that's kind of funny. Lobbying, lobbyists, and political contributions, a markup on purchases and or subcontracts. Interesting. Taxes, exempt sales tax on eligible equipment and expenses. Administrative activities and fees associated with a permit. Okay, activities addressing enforcement actions that involve financial penalty. Memberships, including subscriptions and dues. This is kind of interesting because when I think about some of the things that we've talked about has been software specifically that's able to help us with data management and tracking. And so I'm curious to know, is this just for, like, for example, oh, we're part of this association and we need to renew our membership? That's probably what they're referring to. What we would be looking at is a software that's specific to managing the information that this group, for example, will be overseeing as part of this work. Reimbursement or stipends to non-staff stakeholders for their attendance at stakeholder participation meetings or their related expenses. This is actually quite interesting because this is something we talk a lot about in terms of accessibility. So what they're saying is that you can't provide money or ask people to spend money and then you give them that money back for people that are not staff to attend a participation meeting or their related expenses. So we can't provide gift cards to people to attend our events. We can't provide mileage reimbursement to attend our events. It's also how I'm interpreting this because their related expenses would be transportation. If we're trying to get people involved and reduce their barriers to participation, being able to provide mileage would be helpful, or again, a stipend related to their transportation costs. Given the nature of this work, we are operating within a 4-county region. There will be transportation costs associated with it. Alcoholic refreshments, yeah. Entertainment, gifts, prizes, decorations, merit awards and bonuses, donations and fundraising. Okay. Computer, tablets, and software, unless unique to the project and specifically approved by the MPCA as a direct expense. Okay, this is good. This would be unique to the project because up to now, say if we do, it would be unique to the project. Considerations like where would we find the funds to pay for this beyond the grant period? Because this is super important when we think about sustainability for what you're building out. You want to think about the financial aspects of that. If this didn't receive any funding beyond the project period, but there is an expense associated that you know will extend beyond the time of the project period, where are you going to find those funds and how have you already built that into the plan itself? This is also something that I thought about as it relates to recruitment. And what I'm not seeing here, and this is super interesting, so this one says purchase or rental of mobile communication device. Notice what they don't have in this list. It doesn't say anything about construction costs. It doesn't say anything about capital expenses, like physical things. If we wanted to build a structure that's just a giant roof and some public toilets, for example. Granted, I think for an application like this, we probably need to have agreements already in place and like letters of support from the city and maybe some construction estimates, that kind of thing. But let's say that we had all of that in place and we wanted to build a physical structure that was going to be multi-use for the community. Maybe it's being like owned by the city and it's leased out, or owned by a nonprofit or whatever. And then they lease it out to people that want to use the space. I am not seeing anything on this list that says that you couldn't do that with these dollars, which I think is something super important to keep in mind, because it's possible that this funding source may be renewed again in the future. And so as you're planning, working with community members, thinking about what the needs are, not just in the human capital space, but also physical infrastructure that's going to help make your food system more resilient at whatever scale, consider that. That's something I'm going to be keeping in mind as well. Priorities. Okay, they want to ensure fairness, precision, equity, and consistency. This grant prioritizes projects that encompass their scope, are located in and or will provide direct benefits to communities with higher concentrations of low-income residents, people of color, or limited English proficiency, including tribal communities. Click on the link below for MPCA's Criteria and Interactive Mapping tool to see if the project is located in an area of concern for environmental justice. Okay, so what we've got here, and I did pull this up, this is the link to their environmental justice map. I'm going to zoom out just slightly if I can. There we go. So, all right, for those of you, let's look at a map too, because I'm sure that looking at the political boundaries will be helpful for those of you who aren't familiar with this region. Okay, so here we go. And even looking at Partnership for Health's website might be helpful. This is Clay County. This is just one of 4 counties that are included within the jurisdiction of the work that this council oversees. We have this metro area over here, Fargo-Moorhead. This is the state border, so North Dakota is on the side, Minnesota is right here. That's a whole other interesting dynamic in itself. And then, so basically this is like Red River Valley, big sugar beet production area, one of the biggest in the country. And then you take this highway, what is this? Highway 10. Follow over it, you drive through a bunch of small towns. It's super flat over here, by the way, and then you start to get into sort of the lakes region, as you can see by the map. So let's look at Becker County, because that's going to make more sense in terms of mapping this out. Okay, so then as soon as you pass beyond this block, you start getting over into Detroit Lakes, and White Earth Reservation has a pretty good chunk of its space within Becker County. That's really important for the work that we do. Why? Because of this question of equity. And we'll see that on this map. You can start to see this is White Earth Reservation. And according to this legend, the parts that are in the blue with the lines, at least 35% of the people reported income less than 200% at the federal poverty level, and then 40% or more in these green areas, 40% or more people of color within those. Okay, so we've covered, there's a good chunk in this area up here. That might be Clay County, we'll see. And then Becker County basically goes like there. So that might actually be above the area. But then this is interesting, right? You're like, what's going on here with this green box? And anybody who knows the area understands why that is. But if you don't, you're going to see there's this little town here. Pelican Rapids is most likely the reason why this is green. And when you look at that, it'll even say, within this census tract, 35.09% reported income less than the 200% federal poverty level. Interesting. It also says 21.71% are reported as residents with limited English proficiency. Pelican Rapids, honestly, is a very special place in my heart. Anyone who has worked with me before, you know that the connections that I have within that community run quite deep. It's a special place, amazing people, and the diversity is one of its best qualities, honestly. It's such a great town. So, okay, as you think about that, we've covered 2 of the counties. Then we're going to look at what's going on over here, which would be Otter Tail County. So let's look at that on this map just to give you a sense of the size. Otter Tail County, giant square, lots of lakes. In fact, the county in Minnesota with the most number of lakes per square mile, entire state, right? Tons of water. They always talk about Minnesota being the state of 10,000 lakes. I don't know how many thousand are here, but I'm sure there's a lot. So, okay, thinking about this, look at that. Pelican Rapids falls within Otter Tail County. And then we look at the map here, and it's roughly this area. So Fergus Falls also falls within Otter Tail County, and we'll get back to that one actually later. So then as we're looking at this area, Fergus Falls also has at least 35% of people reported income less than 200% of the federal poverty level. One of the initiatives of our food council is looking at creating a food hub in the Fergus Falls area. Anyone local to the area understands, or they might not know actually, there is a history of a food hub having been located there, but it did not survive. So that idea is particularly interesting to me to think about. What could that look like in today's day and age? Okay, last one. We're looking at Wilkin County, which is sort of this long, skinny area. Got Wahpeton in there. And so again, another like border city area. I'm trying to remember. Yes, Wahpeton, Breckenridge. So Wahpeton is on the North Dakota side. Breckenridge is on the Minnesota side. They've got a similar dynamic as Fargo-Moorhead in terms of just, you know, the complicated nature of having this metro that sort of divides 2 state lines. You've got to deal with all kinds of interesting regulations as a result of this. Again, big farming community here, a lot of corn, soy, wheat, as we were talking about in that previous video where we looked at the One Watershed, One Plan. A lot of sugar beets in this area as well. So looking back at this map again, we can kind of look at this area here. Towards the southern part, we've got the blue showing up, and then we also have stuff going on the Breckenridge side. Very interesting. I imagine that if this extended into North Dakota, this would basically create a bubble around both sides. And we do have one of our advisory team members working within the community of Breckenridge, and so that's a really important connection for us on the Wilkin County side. So let's return to this RFP to look at what they're looking for here. It just says that they're going to prioritize things that are located within those particular communities. The work that we have done in Pelican Rapids is good. The work that we're discussing in Fergus Falls will be a priority, moving into what subcommittees have already identified as what they want to do. So that should be pretty easy to talk about. And then the nature of the work encompassing this 4-county region, and particularly talking about White Earth Nation, is an important one. I think one of the questions on the actual application, I'm going to look this up. Oops. It's barriers and challenges. I think one of the things that we could write about here, it's the relationship building, deepening versus like high level, superficial engagement, and sort of this piece of we need to recognize, especially with working with the tribal community, the legacy of distrust and just being really conscious about communicating with each other. What is the progress that we're making in building those relationships? How are we keeping each other informed? I'm going to say informed of the conversations that we're having, especially ones that lead to new partnerships or relationships is an important one. Because one of the things that I've seen that's really important, and I don't want to put people in this trap of, is, you write about stuff in an application and you're like, oh, we're going to engage this many people, and oh, we're going to, have this many metrics and outcomes. But it's like, don't do yourself a disservice by claiming that you're going to do all these things, have these relationships that actually aren't there, and then you have to go back and report on that information. Just set yourself up for success and be realistic about who is it that you already know, who is it that you want to build relationships with, and at what speed are you comfortable with building those relationships. A year is a very short time. Often it's the multi-year build up that leads to us being able to whip out a grant application like that. And so that's something that I want to keep in mind, is making sure that we are communicating with each other about what we're doing. The food council, like the monthly food council meetings, they serve as an opportunity to share what we've been up to, like over the last month, provide community updates, and ask for help from others. And that's a really important piece of just like what keeps this work sustainable and what strengthens the relationship. So as a reminder, the prompt was sort of not only what are the potential barriers or challenges, but how are you going to address them. I think the important thing is like invitations for engagement or participation sort of, and I'm trying to describe like that result from tokenism, I think is what's coming to mind. Like we're trying to check a box that, oh, we invited the tribal people to the event and they didn't show up. Like it doesn't work that way. You have to have authentic conversations and connection with people. It just doesn't happen overnight like that. This is good. A broad array of community residents, organizations, and institutions. Okay, we've talked about that. So then it gets into the application instructions. Basically it says we need to complete an application form, a work plan, and a budget. And then applications without all forms submitted will be deemed ineligible. That is fine. It's due by the 30th at 4, very soon. Swift stuff, application questions, you need to submit it through the supplier portal. Okay, review process, they're going to have NPCA staff review it. And then eligibility review, they're going to make sure that we're eligible first. And then in step 2, they look at application scoring. There's a couple of things that I wanted to highlight here within this. If they have 2 applications that score really high, they're going to be looking at these particular pieces to figure out which one are they going to score higher. Engagement and involvement, so like who have you involved in the process? They have a wide range of people who are engaged in it, involved, right? And then the next one is environmental justice. So it's going to be looking at, okay, specifically where they are investing their time and energy, and does it rank high in terms of those priority areas. I think that makes a lot of sense. This is key. Notification. All applicants will be notified approximately 60 days after the application due date. That means that we will know by roughly the end of July if we have received the funds or not. It does not say at all how soon after you found out if you've been awarded the money you will actually get it. The next piece talks about grantee responsibilities. You have to register as a vendor. That's fine. There's a grant agreement. They did give an example within the bid requirements. You know, what does that look like? This is basically what would you be signing with NPCA. And then, okay, let's get back into this guy. Reporting requirements. This talks about sending an invoice, public data. Applications are private or non-public until opened. Once the applications are open, the name and address and the amount requested is public. That's super interesting. And then it says after all agreements are fully executed, all the remaining data in the applications is public, with the exception of trade secret data. Okay, also really good to know. Conflict of interest. basically don't want you to have any. And then it talks about grant monitoring. So this one basically means somebody would come to see us if we're going to be asking for $50,000 or more. We might fall right, under that. We'll see. And then monitoring schedule will be scheduled later. Grantees that are municipalities must follow contracting bidding requirements. That's totally fine. Required financial and grantee capacity review. Basically, this is saying, can you manage this money? That's essentially what this is about. And so that's what these questions are. Please describe your history of performing the work that will be funded by the grant. So they're being like, are you actually qualified to even do this? Have you done anything like this before? And then, they say, describe your organization's current staffing and budget. Okay. Certification, that you haven't committed a crime, and then evidence of good standing. So you just need to have all of your paperwork up to date with the Secretary of State. This is some specific stuff for nonprofits. And then it gets into auditing, lots of legal jargon, voter requirements. Okay, that's fine. Let's get into this. Exhibit A, application evaluation score sheet. This is a very important one to review. When you are thinking about, going into the process of writing, what do I need to be keeping in mind? First one, 20 points. That's weighted heavily when you start to skim, all of these other categories, 10. There's 2 that have 15, and then this one's 20. Overall project. Project has a clearly defined purpose, scope, community need, and specific goals, tasks that describe how those objectives will be met, a realistic time frame, and a budget that includes reasonable and cost-effective. An implementation project is contained in an existing plan. And as we've already pointed out in previous videos, we're looking at this climate action plan, we're looking at the regional food systems plan, and we also have the one watershed, one plan for at least one of the watersheds that covers a good chunk of the different counties. Use of climate data. Project as detailed in the application effectively incorporates consideration of the following as part of the planning and/or implementation work proposed: the current climate trends and projections of future climate conditions using Minnesota climate, and how the impacts are anticipated to affect the general location of the local jurisdiction for the proposed planning, and/or how the specific actions to be implemented will be resilient and increase the resilience of the community to those conditions as applicable, and/or the amounts and relative contributions of local greenhouse gas emissions for categories of emissions generating activities in the local jurisdiction as it relates to the proposed planning, and/or the relative significance of the specific local greenhouse gas emissions reductions anticipated to result from the actions proposed for this project as applicable. Okay, so summarizing that, how am I interpreting this? They want you to be connecting the research that has been done about climate trends specifically for your region and bringing that into the application narrative. Explain how are taking the actions that you have in mind going to make your region or the community that you serve, whatever it is, more resilient, and increase the resilience of the community to that changing condition. When I think about it, on this particular note, what's coming to mind is resilience in terms of food prices, right? So as we think about imported foods and climate disruption, you also have transportation costs associated with that. When you have local food, for example, you have less is able to disrupt the complexity of the systems that are bringing you. So for example, because it's not traveling halfway around the world, it doesn't matter if there was a drought in California, because here in Minnesota we had great weather and great production, and because of some other thing that's affecting the cost of gas, the price of the food like, there aren't a bunch of middlemen that are basically adding all of these costs that are associated with bringing you the food from point A to point B. So I think that's important. So middlemen sort of like hiking the price aren't there. With like local producers, well, let's just say there's going to be more money will circulate in the local economy and bring investment towards like local people. So it's financial resilience. But then you also think about, okay, what are the other ways that creating more access to local food, reducing food insecurity, makes the community more resilient? One of the things that's coming to mind is when you have more people who are producing local food, for example, it's this, there's always this piece about self-sovereignty that's really important to me. It's like you're empowering people to make local decisions and giving them the tools to do those things themselves. So for example, supply chain disruptions, and I will just say, maybe we'll put that one up here. So with that, it could lead like empty store shelves, shortages of product, and higher prices. But then when you have stuff that's locally available, you're able to fill the gap of something that might otherwise be imported. I mean, there's something about that piece of when you're creating resilience, it's like more touch points, more diversity, because we know that there's tons of consolidation within the food industry, and that's what makes our food system so fragile. The other thing is thinking about resilience in terms of streams of income for people. So for the farmers, right, it's local. I think that's an important one. We can also think about like resilience in terms of relationships, and that when we foster a culture and a community that is in great communication with each other, we create more opportunities for partnership, alliances, better use of resources, and the ability to like tap into a greater portion of the public to reach our goals, because we have sort of like a diverse set of stakeholders who are involved. I think that once we get further into the grant writing process, it'll become clearer what specifically is the action item, and then tying that directly to resilience. But I'm just sort of brainstorming here to get a sense of what that would look like based on our context. Okay, so we've made it to page 12 and another 30 minutes has gone by. So we're gonna wrap this up with part 2, and then the next video we'll get into part 3.